you collapse as a human being. What it means to be human, the very anthropology of existence, is violated when we transgress moral boundaries and declare that there is no God.
Father John, number 6 out of 6. We're finishing off Dostoevsky and Nietzsche today.
It's good to be doing so. Yeah, it's nice to be with you, Paul.
Yeah, I got off work today, came into the kitchen, and my wife was making spaghetti and meat sauce and was listening to our last conversation. So it's not always,
Okay.
I'll admit that she listens to all of the interviews that I do, but she's really like, look forward to every episode of this one. So,
She gets the inside. Yeah, she gets the inside
yeah.
uh, view
Yeah,
of it.
she
Yeah.
gets the comments and always has a couple of questions and stuff like that as well. So, yeah. Yeah. So great. We have covered Nietzsche. We spent a lot of time also talking about the time period that they've lived in. And we've really spoken
Yeah.
about these two men's lives. So I really encourage anyone who's just dropping into this episode here. There's a playlist. You can see the playlist and go back and watch the whole series. It's been an incredibly fascinating conversation. And we're going to finish off today talking about Dostoevsky's three great works that he created towards the end of his life. And the significance, of course, still for our situation today. Which for me, we just had a conversation as well last week with Father Patrick about the whole situation. I think you used the term afterwards about COVID to Kirk, which has really been like a 5 years
Mm,
that's
mm.
really transformed things in the Orthodox Church as well. And I think there's been a massive thing there, and I thought that was a great conversation as well. So yeah, but yeah, we're going to dive into what are the three works, Father John. I've read only two of them, so I'm still missing one. But
Well, we'll want to talk about probably four works
oh,
altogether, and
okay,
the great ones that all follow. And this is where we left off last time, I believe. The publication in 1864 of Notes from Underground, where Dostoevsky kind of announces his alternative view of human existence and the cosmos and man's place in this cosmos. In 1866, he publishes the first of these four, and that's Crime and Punishment. Then in 1868, he publishes The Idiot. And then in 1872, he publishes Demons. That's sometimes translated as The Possessed or simply Devils. Demons is the best translation of that title, Biesi in Russian. And then the final and greatest work for sure, I think most people would agree, is The Brothers Karamazov, which he completes just before his death in 1881.
mhm, okay. So yeah, how are we going to approach these works, Father John?
Well,
What?
let me, if I may, let me do a quotation for us from the last of these great works, and that's the Brothers Karamazov. Now, last time we talked about how Dostoevsky was he was a believer. I want to emphasize that in a time of atheism, and we spent a lot of time talking about the atheistic culture of 19th century of the 19th century West, how so many people, of in positions of intellectual cultural leadership were atheistic, or maybe agnostic in some cases, but some quite definitely atheistic, philosophically so. John Stuart Mill, someone we talked about, who's associated with liberalism and its ideology, the ideology of liberalism. Karl Marx, famously, an atheist associated with socialism as an ideology. And then many other, atheists and certainly agnostics in this time. There was just a collapse of confidence in traditional Christianity. It had been in decline, ever for a long time. And I have a four-volume series of books called The Rise and Fall of What the West Once Was, title being Paradise and Utopia, where I talk about this long decline since the Great Schism, since the time when the West lost contact with the East and therefore with Orthodox Christianity, which had always placed, and you and I talked about this, a transformation imperative in this world, that the world should be transformed, but transformed in a heavenly way, rooted in the kingdom of heaven, looking toward the kingdom of heaven, and how that disintegrated slowly over time after the Great Schism. And by the 19th century, there's really little left in it in the cultural leadership of the West, and that's why the atheism and agnosticism is so strong. And as to review, as we said with Nietzsche, there's a lamentation about the loss of this rootedness in heaven, The atheists seemed very comfortable, rejecting Christianity and were in their own way. Nietzsche was less so, more ambiguous, and his famous way of putting it was, "We killed God. God is dead." And that leaves us with no mythology, no mythos, nothing to really invigorate, animate our culture, to give us a sense of being and purpose. And as an atheist himself, he came to conclude that in the absence of God, and because God is dead, all there is left is the will to power, the will to dominate, the will to just allow a meaningless force, the will to power, transform one's life, but without any productive results, not bringing one closer to salvation, as in traditional Christianity, not making the world a better, happier place, as in the case of utopian Christendom and humanism, but just leading one off a precipice of meaninglessness into an abyss of nothingness, of
Yeah.
nihil, nothingness.
Can I get a little sidetrack in here, Father John? I was just talking to an American Protestant the other day who was a great guy, had a lot of great opinions, and he's working in a similar field to me with men. And he was talking about America and the American Constitution and the American kind of like, foundation of its society as a Christian society. And I said to him, well, a lot of the founding fathers, might have had some kind of relationship with God in the church, but most of them are really deists.
Yeah,
So th
yeah.
this wasn't really at all. And he was like, well, they believe in God, like, they're kind of Christians, right? Like that's just good enough. And I think for a lot of people, they don't realize how you were speaking about how like atheism really was predominant during this time. I think your guys, the Declaration of Independence was 1770 something or around there, right? But
76,
people
yeah.
think like, oh, they were all like, God-fearing men or something. But can you just
Yeah,
explain where
okay. I
that?
mean, yeah, and I talk a little bit about this in my Age of Utopia and the American Revolution and all that stuff. These founding fathers, we call them. It's really interesting. We call them fathers. Like, we Orthodox are used to the church fathers, and the study of them is patristics. I haven't ever heard of political patristics in American political science, but this is pretty much what is done. They were all children of the Enlightenment, so-called. I call it the Be-Nightenment because of its rejection of Christianity. The leaders being Rousseau and Voltaire and people like that, who had brilliant things to say about making the world a better place and bringing about political improvements and justice and things like this. One of them, Beccaria, was an Italian who wrote a book called On Crime and Punishments, where he talked about the rationalization of the criminal codes and so forth, to the end being very humanistic and making the world a better place, even in the area of crime, and that's where Dostoevsky is going to get his title. However, in America, there was alongside these elites and very many of these fathers of the American Constitution and so forth, like Thomas Jefferson, were deists. They had rejected quite self-consciously Christianity as a body of superstitions that holds man back from improving this world and making it a utopia. Their goal was to make the world a utopia. Thomas Jefferson wrote a book, in fact, where he gathered together all of the gospel accounts of Jesus. And he said in doing this, he wants to recognize that Jesus had great moral teachings, like love your neighbor as yourself, but that overall he was absolutely wrong about the fact that the earth has any relationship with heaven. That yes, there's a God, this is deism. He's a watchmaker. He creates the world like a watch with a mechanism, and natural laws, physics take over, and man's left alone to work within those laws to make the place better and forget about salvation or communion with God or resurrection from the dead. And so Jefferson wrote this book. It's usually dubbed the Jefferson Bible.
Uh-huh.
And in doing so, he said he was trying to separate, as you put it, the diamonds from the dunghill of Christianity, the diamonds of moral teaching of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount, from the dunghill of what he considered superstitious accounts of Jesus being born of a virgin and rising from the dead and so on. So yes, to your point, the American Revolution was driven by people like Jefferson who had no confidence in traditional Christianity whatsoever. Some of them less radically than Jefferson, but nevertheless, even Washington, was very dubious, I think, in his Christianity. But here's the thing, Paul, and to offer some small defense of the guy you talked to, America was still a Christian population, like the rest of the West was, in certain ways. And while the leadership tended to be these elite agnostic or deistic figures, a lot of people were still, rather piously Christian in whatever form they understood Christianity to be. And the founding fathers created a political system with our Constitution, its First Amendment right to free speech and freedom of conscience and religious association. They created a system that would allow these people, these Christians even, to continue to be Christians and to live accordingly without the state stepping in and saying, we're going to transform your lives directly. That's what the French Revolution, about the same time, a little bit later, will do in France, to the great destruction of the Roman Catholic Church there, and which, of course, the Communist Revolution in Russia, about a century after that, will do in Russia with the Orthodox and other Christians there. And so it's the American Revolution was not about social transformation and religious, elimination of religion or Christianity.
Yeah.
It accommodated that reality.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. But
Okay. Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah,
I mean, but your point
sorry
is
for the
very well
interruption.
taken. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but it's very well taken that America was founded by a leadership that was not Christian, that was apostate. They had been baptized as infants by their pious parents, or kind of pious parents, but they all rejected this as adults, and they worked within beliefs and values that were humanistic and not Christian.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if we go back to the Dostoevsky stream, then
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back and consider now Dostoevsky. At this moment, he's really a striking figure because he takes his position kind of against the dominant agnostic, atheistic, utopian culture that he was born into, and it even had participated in, as a young man before his arrest and exile. I'll read to you here just an account from his final book, The Brothers Karamazov, which reminds us of how he never lost his childhood faith in Christianity, in Orthodox Christianity, even though I think I read a quote last time where he admitted that he was always tempted in this direction, but somehow it held out for him, and this is it's interesting. He debated his contemporaries this way. There was a famous scene. It didn't involve him, but it involved this intelligentsia, this civil society of kind of discontented intellectuals who want to create a utopia in Russia, and they want to overthrow not only the government but the religious authorities. And there was a debate in these circles that Dostoevsky would eventually belong to earlier than his time, that involved a famous writer named Belinsky. Belinsky was one of Dostoevsky's first critics,
Huh.
commenting on his books, his first book. And in this episode, kind of an all-night debate in someone's parlor, in someone's sitting room, they're all elites, enjoying tea and so forth. There's a debate about the existence of God.
Mhm.
And at the end of the night, when the sun rises, they've not come to the end of the debate, and they get up to go, and Belinsky jumps up, who was an atheist, by the way, and he says, "No, you can't leave yet. We haven't decided the existence of God." And so this was always a burning question, the Russians called it. These burning questions, the existence of God, the proper form of government. We've got to reach conclusions. And Dostoevsky's conclusion, in the quote I'm about to read to you, showed that he was convinced, and in his final work, Brothers Karamazov showed he really believed that there is a linkage between this world and the kingdom of heaven. And he talks about other worlds and seeds from other worlds in this passage, in a kind of a graphic, kind of almost, you might say, biological sense. But anyway, this is how he puts it. He puts it in the mouth of the famous elder, Orthodox Christian priest and elder Zosima, Elder Zosima. And this is the quote. Much on earth is concealed from us, human beings, but in place of it, we have been granted a secret, mysterious sense of our living bond with the other world, with the higher heavenly world. And the roots of our thoughts and feelings are not here, but in other worlds. This is why philosophers say it is impossible on earth to conceive the essence of things. God took seeds from other worlds and sowed them on this earth and raised up his garden. And everything that could sprout, sprouted. But it lives and grows only through its sense of being in touch with other mysterious worlds. If this sense is weakened or destroyed in you, that which has grown up in you dies. Then you become indifferent to life and even come to hate it. So that's a very striking statement made by Dostoevsky, I think,
Hmm.
in his final and greatest novel about the existence of the kingdom of heaven, the existence of God, and how if we live in defiance of that reality and in opposition to God and his will for us and his presence through the church, sacramental life of the church in this world, we die. We simply cease to be what we were made to be, and we result in just death. And in all his novels, and we should talk about those now, self-destruction, self-destruction.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it
should
really
we?
strikes me that kind of process where you mentioned, I think, like he just if you don't pay attention to it, if you kind of lose attention to the heavenly world, then that's what leads to it. And a lot of for me, it came very softly, like the kind of secular culture, it comes, just like in that kind of like, oh well, we have to, everybody has different perspectives and we all kind of got to be able to listen to each other and work with each other and understand each other. And it's like that decentering of truth that leads to it's like, oh, let's hear your story, I got my story kind of thing, right? And then as that then you just stop talking about things at the higher level. And so maybe that, I don't know, that's something, there is something about Russians. You've lived there, I know, I've visited, but they're that kind of like the burning questions, that they're
Yeah, yeah,
very ultimate in some ways, right?
absolute. Yeah,
Take
and
things
very
sometimes a little
intense.
bit too seriously, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. So let's talk. I mean, all of his characters, and let's talk. Let's characterize for a moment the four great novels: Crime and Punishment, Idiot, Demons, and Brothers Karamazov. They all feature, interestingly, an atheist. They all have an atheist in them. They all have atheism. And what's interesting about Dostoevsky is, as a believer among atheists, trying to bring the atheists back to Christianity and to prevent the nihilistic apocalypse that he saw around the corner. Demons is especially apocalyptic and showing what's yet to come. In fact, it's a remarkable a prophecy, you might call it, of Stalinism,
Mhm.
because the atheistic revolutionary circle the leader of it decides to kill one of his own revolutionaries in order to create a bond of fear that people will be totally subordinate to his will to power. And
Mhm.
that's very much like
Yeah,
Stalin's,
that's exactly
purges
what
and so
Stalin, yeah.
forth. But anyway, all the novels have an atheist in them, and Dostoevsky really he really respected intellectual atheists, like revolutionary atheists. He did, remarkably. He didn't dismiss them as being kooks, and he really tried to understand them. And he, in Brothers Karamazov, in the person of Ivan Karamazov, one of the four brothers from that book,
Yeah.
um, Ivan Karamazov, gives an account of why he can't believe in God. And it basically comes down to the existence of suffering in this world that God could have prevented but didn't. And a lot of atheists read and would today read that and say, you know what, he got it right. That's why I'm not, that's why I'm an atheist. So he could write in a sympathetic way about atheism. So his novels all have atheism in them, and growing out of this atheism, this rebellion against God, tragically, because of Dostoevsky's respect for atheism and its moral purpose,
Mhm.
um, growing out of this, there's always crime, there's always transgression.
Mhm.
His book Crime and Punishment is properly entitled Transgression and Punishment. Transgression being to step across a boundary, a moral boundary. And so there's always transgression. This takes the form in all of his novels. There's always a murder in all of his novels. There's also always a rape in his novels, and there's often child molestation because Dostoevsky saw that these things as like the ultimate expressions of godlessness. This is where a society, a civilization, a humanity that has lost touch with those other worlds I just quoted. This is how a society dies, as you see this moral transgression taking place. All of his novels, growing out of atheism and the transgression that results from it, also have the theme of suicide. They all have a suicide in them. And Dostoevsky believed that atheism ultimately and inevitably leads to self-destruction and suicide. And so that's also in all of his novels. And then finally, his novels all have a Christian, a traditional Christian, we might say Orthodox Christian voice, so a
Mhm.
character who voices the traditional Christianity in the face of all of this nihilism. And so we'll see that in, we're not going to spend, a long time with all four novels, but, we can't. But we'll see that in all four of those novels.
Mhm.
Yeah. So should we jump in maybe with the first and just consider
Yeah, I
where
think
it
that, yeah.
fits?
Yeah.
Okay. So Crime and Punishment, 1866, it's published. I always like to say, I can't help but to say this, Russia was such a rich culture. Such an incredibly, I mean, the whole 19th century throughout the West was rich and unbelievably rich. I can never get over how rich the culture and art of the 19th century was. But in Russia alone, and Russia considered like a late comer to this richness, she'd only entered into Western culture under Peter the Great about a century or so earlier. Well, Russia had a literary journal in which some early, kind of new novelists trying to make an impact, trying to get themselves a platform established, are publishing. And in this literary journal is called Ruski Vestnik or Russian Messenger.
Mhm.
In 1866, readers of this one, there are many journals and much other things going on. Tchaikovsky's, composing his great work. A reader would read a kind of an excerpt or a body of chapters from the latest the first novel, actually the first great novel of one or another writer and
Mhm.
novelist. And so in one case they were reading an unknown novelist, relatively, named Leo Tolstoy, and an
Mhm.
unknown novel called War and Peace.
Mhm. Mhm.
War
Yeah,
and Peace, like
that
it's
time.
like these are the monuments to our civilization.
Yeah.
And on the months when Tolstoy was not publishing War and Peace in this journal because he's writing rather than publishing, they would read excerpts or the latest installments from another unknown novelist named Fyodor Dostoevsky and a
Mhm.
novel called Crime and Punishment.
Wow.
Off and on. Like,
Wow.
can you imagine
Wow.
living at that one year in
That time.
1866, opening up, your monthly edition of your journal and seeing War and Peace laid out one month and Crime and Punishment laid out
Yeah.
as they're being produced,
Mhm.
as they're being created by this
Yeah.
incredible civilization we call the West.
Yeah.
So Dostoevsky publishes this in 1866. It features a a kind of anti-hero, this is the term usually used, a protagonist who is not a sympathetic person to identify with. He has a lot of sympathetic features to him, but he has a lot that kind of makes you feel uncomfortable. His name is Raskolnikov.
Mhm.
It comes from the Russian word for schism,
Mhm.
one who's a schismatic and separates himself from others. And Raskolnikov, though it's never really, elaborated thoroughly, he's basically an atheist. He has
Mhm.
contempt for Christianity, although he vacillates at certain moments. But he's basically an atheist, and he has come to the conclusion that he has a right, because there is no God, to create moral boundaries by which he must live, that
Mhm.
he is free as a great man to violate the moral boundaries that other people historically live by, and which makes for good social order. So immediately we want to think, who else have we been talking about recently who thinks this way? Nietzsche, of course.
Mhm.
And what's incredible is that Dostoevsky never read Nietzsche. He never did. We know this. He never did, never could have. And yet, in the person of Raskolnikov, in this first of his great novels, Crime and Punishment, he lays out in literary form, fictional form, basically the same figure as the Superman that Nietzsche, in his kind of turbulent, kind of excited and sickly way,
Yeah.
laid out works of philosophy. So let me read to you a passage here from Crime and Punishment that that we have to read in the context of what we've said about Nietzsche. Now, what we've said about Nietzsche is declaring God is dead and there is no God. The great horror for many people is there is no meaning for human existence, therefore, and there's no moral order to live by. There's no longer good or evil. And
Yeah.
and Nietzsche said we need, few of us are supermen, and we will be strong enough to go beyond good and evil. That's the title of one of his books, Beyond Good and Evil. And Nietzsche had talked about this and using cruelty if necessary. If someone gets in your way, you destroy that person. There's no moral bond between you and him. There's no love. Love is an illusion. There's only the will to power.
Mhm.
So in the novel Crime and Punishment, and without any contact with anything Nietzsche ever read, Dostoevsky has the following to say about an article that Raskolnikov, the self-declared Superman who's going to go beyond good and evil, writes, and it's discussed in the novel. And the immediate point of reference for us is Nietzsche's concept of two moralities. There's the slave morality that Christianity introduced, by which most people live,
Mhm.
okay? And it makes you a slave to other people's will to power.
Mhm.
And then there's, as Nietzsche put it, the master morality. Now, Nietzsche literally used these terms. I might have quoted them last time. I have my copy of The Genealogy of Morals next to us. In fact, let me do it. Can I take a moment, Paul, and just
Yeah, sure. I
share
don't
with
think we're
you?
gonna get to all four books today, Father John. Just so, but
I promise I'm going to try to do this. Let me
let's
see if I
focus on this
can.
one. I think that's great.
Yeah. Um, I think I've got the quote here. Let me see if I can find it quickly. I'm having a hard time coming up with it. I should have put this together before we
No
started
worries.
talking
But
about
while
the
you're
no.
looking, I can just mention that when you're talking about having like Crime and Punishment, War and Peace coming out in that thing the same time, I was thinking like, what's the equivalent today? You know, like people waiting for the new iPhone or the new Star Wars film or something coming out, and like the trivialization of culture in some way, the decentering of those burning questions that we're focused on, and so yeah, it's
Yeah.
somehow. You know, when I first read Crime and Punishment, actually, there was just like, oh, I should go read this book. It was long before I was a Christian myself. And I read actually the whole book, I have to admit, but I understood nothing. I understood nothing. I really
Hmm.
didn't get it. When I myself set out on a spiritual journey, then I went to some workshops that really kind of changed my perspective in a deep way. And I remember just feeling like, how do I know what's right to do now? Like, so I'd go around and ask me, like, should I do like this? Should I do like that? But I was still looking for the opinions of other people around me. So thank God I never fully embraced a Nietzschean kind of like, my way or the highway kind of thing. Um, oh, you're suddenly muted, Father John.
No, most people can't and won't, and that's because most people every that's not because most because everyone is made in the image and likeness of God, and there's something indelible in us that cannot act that way unless, and here we're going to want to talk about Nietzsche's end and compare it to something that happens in the story with Raskolnikov, unless we push ourselves to such a self-destructive nihilistic end
Yeah.
that nothing holds together and the human personality just collapses in self-destruction. Here's one quote from the genealogy of morals that I grabbed here. I mean, it's not exactly laid out perfectly, but this is just to give you a taste of what Nietzsche is saying. To require of strength, I'm sorry, yes, to require of strength, the will to power, that it should not express itself as strength, the will to power, that it should not be a wish to overpower others, a wish to overthrow, a wish to become master, a thirst for enemies and antagonisms and triumphs. In other words, you're looking for antagonism and enemies, and you're exercising your will to power over the other, is just as absurd as to require of weakness that it should express itself as strength. And it's not the best quote, but it gives us a taste of what Nietzsche was trying to say, or did say, with his
Mhm.
master morality versus slave morality. Now let me take us to Raskolnikov and
Mhm.
his article,
Mhm.
which is discussed in the novel. And it's just chilling, Paul, to hear how close Dostoevsky's language is, or at least Raskolnikov's language is, to Nietzsche. So they're talking about his article, Raskolnikov's article in the novel, and this is a quote from it. The whole point of this article is that in his article, all people are somehow divided into the ordinary and extraordinary. The ordinary must live in obedience and have no right to transgress the law, because they are, after all, ordinary, while the extraordinary have the right to commit all sorts of crimes and in various ways transgress the law, because in point of fact, they are extraordinary. It just couldn't be more like just parallel to what
Yeah.
Nietzsche would be saying later in the same century and never read by Dostoevsky.
Mhm.
So what we can say about Crime and Punishment is it puts forward in an imaginary way where we're going as a civilization.
Mhm.
Forget about humanism, forget about utopia. Dostoevsky knew well enough from his experience in Siberia that utopia was an absolute delusion. Nietzsche came to conclude that too with his criticisms of the crypto-Christian atheistic Marx and John Stuart Mill. And so both of them are now exploring the weaknesses and the impending collapse of utopia. Again, all of this just a couple decades before World War I would expose that collapse of
Mhm.
utopia, and the
Mhm.
20th century would take off as an
Mhm.
anti-utopia, a dystopia. Both of them are exploring this, and Dostoevsky is exploring it from a Christian point of view, whereas Nietzsche was celebrating the nihilism and saying, let's go, let's just keep going in this
Mhm.
direction. So Crime and Punishment features Raskolnikov committing a crime that quickly gets out of control. He winds up having to kill two people, not just one, in order to seize money to advance his place in society and be able to do good for the world. And the punishment after this transgression, and by the way, I say transgression because throughout the novel, the phrase overstepping certain boundaries is used all the time. Overstepping. Now,
Mhm.
this is Nietzschean language, going beyond good and evil,
Yeah.
transgressing. And
Yeah.
it's also, I want to throw in here because we talked about Wagner and how important he is in all of this.
Yeah.
Wagner, in that famous scene that we talked about a few episodes ago, where Wotan stands with his spear that represents like divine law by which man must live, and Siegfried steps forward with his sword Notang and breaks the spear.
Mhm.
Before that happens, Wotan says, whoever fears the tip of my spear will never cross through the fire. There's magic fire burning behind him that Siegfried will enter after this episode. And the term, it's Durchschreite in German. It means similar, it's similar like stepping across a boundary.
Mhm.
And so there's all this really fascination with moral transgression at this
Mhm.
moment in the West when we're just ready to be done with utopia and move into nihilism. Really interesting.
I don't know if it's yeah, I don't yeah. I've done an exercise when I was in some kind of like very explorative new age group where you were with another person and one person you were paired up with two people and then as one person had to do things that were transgressive to the other person and just experiment
Huh.
with it. And the other person had the job at some point to say like no. But it was
Hmm.
it was very strange because I saw a whole room of people when we were doing this they people loved it. It was like incredibly like just stepping over these boundaries. It was like to be given permission to do something. So there's something in people, that when you get, and I think all these people were desperately searching for something rather than nothing, right? They were in that place of like, what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? And so they'd come to a very, I myself come to a very extreme place. And so then there was this kind of, preacher of something or other. I don't know what, probably the will to power, right?
Hmm.
Encouraging us, giving permission to us to then experiment, just like just don't worry about what's normal, just do whatever you feel like, kind of thing, right? And
It's demonic, right? It's like the serpent speaking to Eve in paradise and saying, there's a boundary in front of you. On the
yeah,
day you eat this fruit, you shall surely die, but don't let that boundary get in your way.
yeah,
Yeah. So Raskolnikov commits the murder, and then the whole, and that's the transgression, but the whole punishment in the novel is his inner moral collapse, his spiritual collapse. So that's really interesting. The novel does end with a kind of incarceration kind of moment, but that's an epilogue, and the whole story is about the punishment, really, is not that you get, 10 years in Siberia or something like that. It's that you collapse as a human being. What it means to be human, the very anthropology of existence, is violated when we transgress moral boundaries and declare that there is no God. So that's Raskolnikov's punishment, and he escapes the punishment, is delivered from it through the intercessions of a young woman, a girl, who represents Christianity, Orthodox pious Christianity, and the hope in the resurrection, and the hope in forgiveness. And what's really interesting, and I won't, we just did actually, we're actually finishing up in my parish church here a reading of Crime and Punishment in our reading fellowship group we have here that meets like every other week. And we're just approaching the very end of the novel now. So
Oh,
I've got it
okay, good
fresh on my
timing.
mind, and I won't take us down any rabbit holes. But what I will say about this girl, her name is Sonia.
Yeah.
And what she does is at one point, Raskolnikov just can't take it anymore, the inner moral anguish of having violated these moral boundaries. He comes to her, knowing she's a Christian, and begs her to read the gospel to him. And so she reluctantly does so, knowing that he's basically an atheist and unbeliever. And it's very liturgical. It's really interesting. It's Orthodox Christianity has, during the liturgy, the priest or deacon comes out, opens the gospel, and says at that time, and says, that reads the gospel for that day.
Hmm.
It's like this. He comes to her almost like, the repentant almost like a repentant person, and asks her, she plays this priestly role, to read the gospel to him, and she does so, and it's the gospel of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Now, Lazarus, of course, was raised from a tomb. He was dead, and Jesus calls him back to life. And this is exactly what Dostoevsky's saying about Raskolnikov and modern man, who has entered into this atheistic state, is that man has died. It's not God who died, who's dead, it's man who's dead without God. And so it's really remarkable, this scene, as Raskolnikov listens to this reading of the raising of Lazarus from the tomb.
Hmm.
Dostoevsky actually describes Raskolnikov's garret kind of apartment as a tomb, a coffin that he lives in. It's so small and claustrophobic. Then
Hmm.
later in the novel, because it takes a while, Dostoevsky was a realist. This realism, literary realism, is the thing in the 19th century. So he doesn't idealize anything. Dostoevsky has Raskolnikov continue to suffer over his crime and transgression, and then toward the end of the novel, he comes back to her, and he confesses that he is the one who killed the two women, and she says, and he asked her what to do. So now he's a penitent asking for a penance. And
Hmm.
she, in this priestly role, says, "You must do the following." It's like, in order to give you, for absolution to come, you have to do something. You must go to the public square, it's the Haymarket Square in Petersburg, and kiss the earth, the cosmic, earth that you've defiled. You've defiled the whole cosmos. You've ripped it up. It has an order to it given by heaven. It doesn't function on its own like utopia.
Hmm.
It's a paradisiacal kind of experience, and you have to go and kiss that earth, and then you have to bow in all the directions to the people around you that you've sinned against them because you've sinned against the whole cosmic order by killing this woman, even though you didn't kill them. And so he does that finally, and they laugh at him and they tell him to get lost. He must be drunk or something like. So Dostoevsky is very realistic about this. It's not like everyone's all suddenly happy.
Hmm. Yeah.
And finally, he confesses. He goes into the police station, and I can't give it away. So I'll let your audience just wonder what happens at the
What
very
do you
end of
think,
the
Father
novel.
John, was what made the conversion or like the realization of Raskolnikov like so believable or realistic? Like, I think many people who've been living in perhaps a protected life and maybe they're not so, they maybe don't believe in God, but they're also not very courageous. They don't have this Nietzschean kind of will to power. And so they've just kind of lived within the
Yeah.
boundaries. I think a lot of people are tempted by sin or, by devious, transgression, and they don't know that there's a price to be paid in your soul. That is that that destructiveness of the soul that you're talking about. So
Yeah.
what do you think it was about Dostoevsky's portrayal that made it so impactful and made the case so strong? So even today, Jordan Peterson stands on the stage and uses this example, like this is kind of proof for him, right? And people take him seriously.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people can read Dostoevsky without, having a conversion experience and just saying, "Hey, that's interesting Christian, witness through literature," and he certainly has important things to say, and he's a very powerful thinker, but it's just not for me. I'm not a believer. A lot of people, I mean, Albert Camus, the most famous, in my opinion, who in the late 20th century, as a atheist, read and just was just preoccupied with Dostoevskian themes,
Hmm.
and remained an atheist despite
Hmm.
that. So a lot of people, are not going to be affected by it, and as you say, most people are not going to be Raskolnikovs. They're not going to act that way. It is pretty extreme the way Dostoevsky lays it out, but this is an age of extremes.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe what else to say in answer to your good question there.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But let me before we leave this behind, and I don't know if we're going to be able to cover the other novels, but I do want to say one other thing about this and in connection to Nietzsche because it's so important. And that is that before he commits the crime, very early in the novel, Raskolnikov is ruminating about this and trying to encourage himself. You are a great man, right? Like, why shouldn't you step over certain boundaries and kill this woman and take her money? And as he's doing this, he has a dream. He falls asleep and has a dream. Now, we should bring Freud into this because Freud, Dostoevsky, of course, never read Freud. Freud came later. Freud read Dostoevsky and said Dostoevsky is one of the most profound, thinkers he's ever read, especially because of his attention to the irrational, like
Hmm.
in Notes from Underground, 2 times 2 equals 5 sometimes.
Yeah.
And also in passages like this where the dreams reveal something about reality. And Raskolnikov's dream is really striking because he dreams that he's a boy again and he has his childhood Christian faith. And with his father, who protects him and he has an affection for him, walks him by a tavern on the street. And walking by this tavern, as he's walking down the street, the boy, Raskolnikov, having Christian kind of moral boundaries, observes a scene in which a drunk group of peasants come out and beat a horse to death right
Hmm.
there on the
Hmm.
street,
Hmm.
declaring that, there should be no boundaries, it's my property. The peasant keeps on yelling, and as he beats the horse to death, before just kind of as a wild lark kind of action,
Hmm.
moral action,
Hmm.
just to cross those boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Now, I hope your audience is thinking what I'm trying to get them to think about, but we talked about Nietzsche and his end, his demise. That Nietzsche, we know Nietzsche read Dostoevsky. We also know Dostoevsky never read Nietzsche. Nietzsche in 1889 is walking home to his apartment down the street, and in front of his street, a man starts beating a horse.
Yeah.
Not to death, as in the case of the dream of Raskolnikov, but just starts beating him cruelly.
Hmm.
And Nietzsche's mind snaps, and he never recovers his sanity. He goes totally insane at that moment. And for the rest of his life, and it was another 11 years before he died, he just lay on his back in a state of total insanity. Now, it's remarkable that these two, prophets of nihilism, who both saw the specter of nihilism beginning to appear over the West, these two prophets had the same way of experiencing or communicating
Hmm.
what the will to power really led to. It led to self-destruction.
Yeah.
And in this case of Nietzsche, it's like he looked into that cruelty, that will to power, which caused, by the way, I should say, when Raskolnikov wakes up from the dream, he says, my God, am I capable of doing that to that woman? No, 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 I won't do it. I won't kill her." And of course, he
Hmm.
finally gets talked by the demons into killing her. But that's his reaction. And Nietzsche, he has no reaction. He just goes insane when he sees that. It's like he looked into that abyss
Hmm.
of godlessness, of godless will to power, of transgression, and his mind, his humanity just wasn't up to being able to do that, and it collapsed. It's
Hmm.
really remarkable.
Yeah.
And
I
he,
guess that could be the answer to my question that I said, like, why was it so convincing when Dostoevsky described that collapse? Well, maybe because it's just the truth. That is the way that things play out. That is the structure of reality, that there are
yeah,
laws and boundaries, and when you transgress them, then there's a consequence. I guess
yeah,
we
and
don't know if there was an actual, like, if Nietzsche had read that passage and then somehow everything clicked for him, or something like that. Maybe he just read it recently and he's seeing it himself, suddenly became alive, or yeah.
we know he read The Idiot, and we know he read Notes from the House of the Dead, Dostoevsky's account of Siberia. We don't know that he read Crime and Punishment. He could have. We just don't know if he did. But it's remarkable too that Nietzsche, like Raskolnikov, had thought of himself as a Superman. I mean, he was writing his, I think we talked about Ecce Homo, right? His autobiography.
Yeah.
We talked about that, I think,
Bystander. Yeah, we did. Yeah.
right? Which is an allusion to Pontius Pilate pointing to Christ saying, Ecce homo, behold the man. And Nietzsche in his autobiography is saying, don't behold that man, behold me. I'm the Antichrist, as he claimed to be. He's going to destroy Christianity. He's going to leave a new vision for the West in place that will be anti-Christian.
Hmm.
And he's signing his letters to friends. I am the crucified one, and things like he had this delusion kind of experience, this megalomania that he inherited from Wagner, that he was the future. In fact, the titles of his autobiography are Why I Am the Future of Civilization, Why I Write Such Brilliant Books, Why I Am So Clever. And then it just all collapses.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really remarkable. And I think Dostoevsky with Raskolnikov offers, I mean, as Nietzsche's own real life offers, an insight into what we are as human beings and where we can wind up if we really take this cultural movement far enough to reject God and really embrace a nihilistic alternative.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, for just for the listener as well, like, the way you described the comparison between those two guys, Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, in your book, really draws it out. I've never heard the story with the beating of the horse anywhere else than in your book. And it just crystallizes everything very, very clearly. And I think in my own life, it connects the dots so well, of seeing how, when one rejects God, when rejects transcendent meaning in life, adopts the kind of, the current secular mindsets, then it's slow. And because we're not so extreme like Nietzsche, we have still some humility, we have some kind of sense of conscience, that we don't go as extreme as him, but
Yeah.
we're really damaging our soul. We are really damaging our soul one step at a time. And I think many, many men today are finding themselves in that exact situation, that there's something that's broken and it's not working, and they don't really know why. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what you're by understanding this, these extreme cases, then I start to understand a little bit what's happening inside of me as well, because every single one of us is influenced and affected by this culture, and seeing the development of it. I'm a man with children as well, and I can see how this came into my home through the television, through the secular programs that I was watching, through the science that I was studying in school, through all of that kind of stuff. There's this kind of a pre-assumption of the non-existence of God in the things that we're teaching children today. And so by
Mm-hmm.
understanding where these ideas come from as a man, I think it's vital to get that understanding, so that we're prepared and we're ready to be able to yeah, discern what's actually good for us. And this is the way, because our children are getting hurt in this way as well. It's coming into our children's lives, and without us knowing it, it's closing their heart off from God, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right about all that. And without God, then all that's left, anything is permissible, to quote, Brothers Karamazov. Anything becomes permissible in the human being, and the will is all that's left. And like what you were just saying is, so many men, especially today, have no, they're not cultivated to look to anchor their lives in heaven
Yeah.
and a desire for heaven, and all that's left is the will, and the will can become so destructive toward other people and toward our own selves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that something that I really like came aware of is like we don't even really know what the soul is. I remember when I was like, my 20s, it's like, what does it mean? Like, what is the heart? What is these things? Like the nous isn't even a word that we use anymore, right? And so understanding like the deeper parts of a human being. I meet a lot of young guys these days who are looking for a partner. And a lot of guys are frustrated because women are generally better educated and earning more and all these kinds of things. But I think there's one thing that women are really looking for, and that's a man that can lead them to God, like lead them spiritually. And so for a man to understand like these deeper things of the heart, to dedicate his life to seeking God, that this is something that can really bring about a healing that can then give everything else that one needs as well. So that's my hope and my understanding from reading these things and understanding the history of these ideas in the West as how we've got to the position where we are today, where we see the depravity out of the culture. People are noticing like things are falling apart, and they're trying to understand deeper. And I think that's why a lot of people are finding your work, Father John, and have seen it, and I think why someone like Charlie Kirk was interested in talking to you as well, because people are saying like, hey, we need to have a deeper understanding of how we actually got here. And that's what I really, it's not easy to defeat this nihilism. It's basically coming in the air that we're breathing as
Hmm.
we're growing up in this culture.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, we didn't get too far with all the other books, Father John, but we definitely I think we starting with 2 episodes, and it's extended a lot. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
I think our discussion of crime and punishment got Dostoevsky, clear enough on the table for us. I encourage your audience to read all of those four novels, but I think the other three, we don't need to really say much about them. I've said a little already, but I think that the case of Raskolnikov, really captures the overall purpose of what Dostoevsky was trying to say to his increasingly nihilistic generation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Father John, and I'll put the link as always in the description for the video if people want to find more information about your work. And really appreciate all the time that you spent with doing this series.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, Paul. I enjoyed it. Yeah, okay.